Good afternoon, and welcome to BBC Two.
Hello and welcome to Back to the 80s, the podcast that travels back through time in a rose-tinted DeLorean. Yes, folks, welcome to that part of the week where I, Glenn, aka Dreadwind, kidnap somebody in the old nostalgia TARDIS, whisk them away to a time, I won't say a better time, because it wasn't a better time really. It was no different. No different to now. But we didn't know that because we were 6.
So, in this instance, just born.
Thanks, George. Or in my instance, about 10 years old. So, cheers for that.
Sorry.
That's alright. I was going to have you back, but I'm rethinking that.
Damn. That was quick. That's the quickest podcast I've ruined, actually. Fantastic.
That's brilliant, isn't it?
Personal best.
I don't think you're going to get much better than that.
Personal record. Brilliant.
Unless, as you say, shit weasel, as somebody says hello, and then that would be the quickest. But as you may have gathered, we do have a guest this week, and it is somebody I've been trying to get on for 7 years, and we just haven't been able to sync up our times.
No, I'm so sorry about that, by the way, Glenn. I am very sorry about that. But it's actually come to the point now where I actually feel a little bit more confident doing these things since I've started doing a few more. So here I am. And also, you've just got me with the right subject, too.
There we are. So
it's the right
it's
bait. That's what it is. It's the right bait. It's like summoning a demon.
Yeah, exactly. It's like basically fishing.
Yeah.
I'm not good at analogies, but there you go.
Which is what summoning demons is like. For those of you who have tried it, you know it's very much like fishing.
I'll give it a go next time. If you haven't guessed already, if you don't recognise the baritone tones of our guest, it is Mr. George Lee, author, raconteur, intelligent guy, YouTuber formerly, sometimes still does it.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Intermittently, I would say. Intermittently. I'm the kind of YouTuber now that doesn't really do it that often and certainly doesn't read or respond to the comments.
I think that's probably for the best.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is.
Certainly these days. But yes, we finally got him, and he will be on to talk about his favourite subject, or certainly one of his favourite subjects, which is going to be Knightmare.
Oh, man. Even
last time we talked... Well, there you go. I mean, last time we talked about this on the podcast, we actually had a Dungeoneer on.
Really? Who did you have?
Yeah. We had a guy called Giles, who was actually a Dungeoneer. He was the guy who went through with the mask on.
Right, that's brilliant. What season was he from?
I forget.
You forget?
A while ago.
That's
one of the later seasons, I think.
That is superb. So you actually got like a first-hand account of what it was like going into the dungeon.
Absolutely. According to Giles, not much, because he had the mask on.
Of course, yeah, he doesn't get to see very much of it really until later on.
Exactly, because they don't want to see him all the blue screens. Which must look like a big weather office, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of what makes the experience so interesting from that perspective, I suppose. You know, to us, we get the full benefit of the illusion. The Dungeoneer doesn't really, unless they've got a very good imagination, they don't really get the magic of it when they're dungeoneering.
Yeah, I guess it must be actually playing Dungeons and Dragons if you're the Dungeoneer.
Absolutely. although you know there are the one, and it always seems to be the ones that win The ones that do really well are the ones that actually do sort of get into the role-playing aspect of it.
Well, absolutely, because if you don't, then you're not going to commit,
Absolutely,
I suppose.
yeah, and you're not going to really understand, you know. And I also think that, having watched it back numerous times, I think that the production team did actually reward people for getting into it and for being, you know, for playing their role well and for doing a little bit of role play, for acting well.
Yeah, I think so. I would think that would make sense. The more you commit, the better telly you're making, the better you're making them look. Therefore, they're going to make you go longer.
Absolutely.
If you're not committing to the role, then what's the point in having you there?
Totally. Especially in this kind of show, where there is a mythology, where there is sort of a story, an ongoing narrative.
Exactly. Well, we shall talk more about that in a second.
Of course.
Don't want to blow our load
so
too soon.
So easy.
Exactly. What we will do, though, is ask George what you've been doing this week, fella.
What have I been doing this week? I have been just massively busy this week, scribbling and trying to get certain projects into tip-top shape for exposure or publication. I've been working on my joint project with the photographer Nick Hardy, Born in Blood. Which is it's a series of volumes which have Nick's photographs and my short stories based around the theme of mental disturbance and mental illness. It's a deeply, deeply unpleasant piece of work. I make no bones about it. It's so deeply unpleasant, in fact, that I had to take a break from it because it was arousing some very old, unwanted anxieties at one point. But all proceeds from it are going to actually go to the charity Mind.
Oh, right, okay.
So, and we're looking to, I mean, Nick is insane. Nick is absolutely brilliant. He is indefatigable. And he's not only, we've got a table at next year's HorrorCon in London, so there's going to be all sorts of stuff there. He's also organising an exhibition, apparently, of the photographs and all of this stuff. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be insane. So I've been getting the short story collection tip-top for that, because that's going to be published next year. In its entirety.
Brilliant.
It's just diving back into those stories, because they do. I had to sort of delve deep into my own sort of anxieties and neuroses and a fairly troubled period of my life to get what I wanted from them, to get the right feeling and ethos from them. So going over them is a bit tricky.
I can imagine. Yes,
it's a bit triggering, I suppose, is the modern term.
Yes, it's not something you would do willingly, I suppose, unless
certainly not.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that you're doing to accomplish something good out of what's happened.
Absolutely, it's for the effect. It's for the effect, and triggering, I think, is probably the best term for them. They're all very triggering stories. They're designed to be. They're designed to not only broach the subject of mental illness, but to trigger association with it. As to elicit a particular reaction in the audience, in the reader. So hopefully people, I don't know whether people will enjoy it or whether they'll just find it deeply, 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 deeply unpleasant.
Either reaction is valid.
Absolutely it is. I don't mind. I have to say, I don't mind. It's, you know what? Every horror writer, there is a nasty little secret part of us that, were we able to send someone mad through what we write, there is a horrible part of us that would be terribly proud.
Well, that was very Lovecraftian, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. Yeah.
That's exactly what Lovecraft wanted to do to people.
So totally, yeah. He was reaching for the indescribable. That's what he was doing, or something that you cannot actually conceive of or comprehend, which is why so many of his images are so abstruse and so weird, so difficult to actually imagine.
Well, that makes complete sense, because there's a couple of computer games, and I forget what they're called because I'm not really a gamer, but I've been told there's a couple of Lovecraft games where one of them is you don't actually see the monster or the thing that's coming to get you or drive you insane, because you're not able to perceive it, you're not able to understand.
Absolutely.
And if you read any of his stories, that's, the whole reason why people go insane, because they're looking at something they can't possibly understand with their limited reasoning.
That's absolutely true. It's one of the problems that some of the more literal interpretations of Lovecraft's work have, which is that like Cthulhu, for example. I mean, Cthulhu is the most recognizable image from a Lovecraft story. But if you read the stories, although it is specifically described, Lovecraft also makes the point that what he's describing is just how the thing appears within the limitations of human perception. It's an extra-dimensional entity that operates on levels of reality that we can't perceive. So the titanic octopus-faced, winged leviathan from beneath the ocean is only a part of it. It's an aspect of it. It is not literally the entity itself, which is one of the problems that we have when the image becomes crystallized. You know, when you basically when you start having it appearing in video games or in cinema or in plushy form, which it does.
Which I do have one.
Me too. Me too. Don't get me wrong. I've got one too. It is actually not what was intended.
No.
It's not that thing, in the same way that none of Lovecraft's creations are supposed to be portrayed literally. The whole point is you're not supposed to be able to portray them literally.
Yeah. Like Gozer.
A bit like Gozer in that regard. And that's weird because there is some overlap there. There is that real Ghostbusters episode, The Collect Call of Cthulhu.
Yes.
Which is great.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant.
Which is one of the few 80s cartoons I can think of that try to pursue Lovecraft mythology, but there we go.
Well, it's one of the few that actually, I mean, you know, I know it sounds really, I understand the irony or the perversity really of coming on a podcast that's dedicated to nostalgia and railing against nostalgia. But, outside of sentiment, you know, and don't get me wrong, I was born in the 80s. I love all those cartoons. I love Transformers. I love For My Sins, Mask. It's shit, but I like it. I love Visionaries, which is genuinely good. But the vast majority of them are not. You know, on an objective level, they're not good. They have particular resonance. They have a sort of, they resonate with our experience of childhood, and that's why they're sacred artifacts. But on an objective level, they're not good. Like, Transformers isn't good.
Not generally.
It's not cartoon.
It has its standout.
It does. It has the odd episode. Often the ones that have got mythology, the ones that are written by David Wise or whatever, most of those are pretty good. But by and large, they're not. Ghostbusters is, although it has its moments, is generally pretty damn good.
Certainly the early stuff, the later stuff, not so much, but that's a story of it in itself, basically. Excellent stuff. Anything else you've been up to this week, George, at all?
Barring that, lots and lots of work. Lots and lots of work. And that's pretty much it. It has been a very, 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 very heavy period when it comes to the work. And also, I've been, salient to the subject in question, I've been indulging in my annual reviewing of Knightmare. Of course.
Of course. Why not?
Yeah, every October, ladies and gentlemen. It's not always the same time around October. It's usually an indefinable thing. There'll be a moment where I'm like, right, it's time. Let's see if we can find it on YouTube and hope that it hasn't been, copyright,
got.
You know, it hasn't been got, which it generally hasn't. Generally, it's okay because there is no, like, for it, you know, in this insane world that we live in, there's no dedicated DVD release of Knightmare. I mean, what kind of planet do we live on?
Oh, a terrible one. One where Robert Mugabe is a goodwill ambassador.
Absolutely, yeah. That is
Although apparently he's not now. They've decided against it, funnily enough.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Because Robert Mugabe's a horrible person.
Yeah, that is really insane. Although that's the thick of it level self-satire, isn't it?
Oh, definitely, absolutely. It is insane that Knightmare hasn't got more.
I know, 8 seasons. There are the amount of abstruse material there is out there on Knightmare. The stuff that they could include on a dedicated DVD or Blu-ray is insane. It's significant enough to warrant an annual convention now. There is actually an annual Knightmare convention, and there's a Knightmare live play thing that goes on.
Yep.
So, if it's that popular, if it's still that beloved, surely there is some basis for a DVD collection.
And they brought the Crystal Maze back successfully as well.
Absolutely they did. Absolutely they did. Which is not a million miles away from Knightmare in terms of format. It really isn't.
Absolutely not. It's just an adult version of it. I mean, it even had a great host, and still continues to have a great host.
Yes.
In the form of Richard Ayoade.
Oh, he's everything he's in.
Yeah, he's a bit sickening, really.
He really is. He really is. But I love him. I'll watch something on the basis that he's in it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've loved him since the old Dark Place days. Man to Man with Dean Lerner and things like that. So.
That's where I first discovered him, and I've loved him ever since. Because it takes a lot of talent to know enough about acting to know what terrible acting actually is.
Well, the fact is he is a terrible actor as well.
Yeah, there's that too.
Genuinely, he is a terrible actor, which is why he encapsulates Dean Lerner so brilliantly.
Yeah, just channels it.
Yeah. Just ramping his own inability to act up to 11 sort of thing. But, brilliant stuff. Well, we shall start talking about Knightmare in a second, because I can tell that George is absolutely chomping at the bit.
Totally. Foaming.
But we will do the ads first. Well, you can tell. Let's put it that way, which is great. It's fantastic. But we'll do the ads first. They are from the Tyne Tees region this week, from the 4th of November 1989 to the exact arse end of the 80s, literally.
Brilliant.
First ad is quite meta. It is one of those, it's an ad within an ad, within an ad, within an ad. It's basically Josie Lawrence, who I recognised immediately from Whose Line Is It Anyway and other things that she's been in, but mainly that, if we're being honest. Doing fake ads with another set of people, and it turns out I thought it was going to be one of these IBA, ITC sort of, if you're going to watch an advert, then these are certain rules that you have to follow. Swerved me completely, because it's actually for Sony Trinitron, tellies, which I had at one point. Because last week's episode, was an advert for an ITT Nokia, which I had as a television.
God.
But I also had a Sony Trinitron as well. These are, you know, when it was Nikon stereo, when that was a new thing, and it was a flat screen, and you're never going to get a better telly than this. And these days they seem to bring out better and better televisions until next year. I'm certain we'll have holographic televisions at some point.
It's like every other day, really, isn't it? There is something new. There is some sort of development. That's got to be the next thing. That's got to be the next
Absolutely.
thing. Something that's three-dimensional, something that projects.
Yeah, without glasses.
Yeah.
Glasses was the stumbling block of the last 3D thing, I think. The fact that if you want to watch a film, you've got to plug glasses into the telly. People can't be bothered doing that.
No, it's a clunky way of doing it, isn't it?
It absolutely is, but I suppose it was the least expensive way of doing it as well. But there we go. Somebody at work actually said something the other day which threw me completely off kilter. They actually said that they were having their television repaired. Like, what?
What? In this day and age?
What? No, just get rid of it and buy a new one.
Repaired? There are people who still repair televisions. My God.
Probably costs more than buying the telly.
Absolutely, yeah.
Weird, odd. But anyway, there you go. That's the disposable society we live in. Next advert is for a car I hate completely. I fucking hate Audis. I hate Audis and I hate Audi drivers. They're just, every time we're on the road and we get cut up or somebody nearly causes an accident, invariably it's an Audi.
It's an Audi,
so
is it?
Yeah, absolutely. You drive an Audi, don't you?
I don't drive anything. I'm a pedestrian.
Oh, there you go. Excellent stuff.
You know, I hate car
fucking
driving
Audis.
in general, so.
But Audis are the worst. And it makes me laugh, this advert, because it's Audi trying to be all responsible and saying, we care about the environment. Well, it's amazing, because your fucking drivers don't. And Audi's going on about safety and taking kid. I wouldn't take a kid in an Audi. I think they're terrible cars, and I think they're terrible drivers. And what gets me most of all is the fact that they obviously can't afford Porsches, but really, really want them.
It's not quite on the class tier, is it? You're not quite there.
You're not quite Mercedes. You know? Oh, well, I've got an Audi. No, hate the cars, hate the people who drive the cars. Sorry, sweeping statement.
Wow, brilliant. You heard it here, ladies and gentlemen.
Exactly.
You heard.
I have made no secret over the years that I don't like Audi driving.
The Holocaust of Audi drivers began here.
That was it.
It began here, all right?
Yeah, that was it. Speaking of cars driving in irresponsible manners, classic advert from Milky Way. This is the red car and the blue car had a race.
Oh, I love this one.
In its proper form as well.
It ran for ages, didn't it? It kept coming back. They kept changing it and jigging it over.
Yeah, and then they brought it out a couple of years back, and they had to change the whole advert. They had to redo the whole advert, because everybody said, oh, it's the old advert, and it wasn't, because the rules they had changed by then, and you weren't allowed to sell snacks to kids on the basis of it won't upset your tummy for dinner time.
Ah, right, because that was the whole thing with Milky Way back then, of course, that it was the lighter snack, which was, of course, total bullshit. It's filled with nougat, it's terrible, terrible stuff.
It's smaller.
Yes.
That's the thing, it's smaller. And to be fair, Milky Ways, there isn't much to them. I'll be honest with you. It would take a few to fill up, but yeah, because people like not taking responsibility for their actions, and it's all the fault of advertising.
Yeah.
The fact that little Johnny's fat isn't because he can't stop eating multi-packs of crisps. It's because he had a Milky Way in between meals.
Presumably, this will be for the old Milky Way then, the one that came in the blue wrapper rather than the white one.
That's the one, yeah. This is for
chocolatey nougat rather than the white nougat.
Absolutely, this is OG Milky Way back in the day and ting.
I like those ones better than the white ones.
I'll be honest, I've never really liked Milky
Way.
No,
so it doesn't matter.
But I do like the advert.
Yeah, I like the advert too. It's a good one.
It's a classic. It really is a classic. But yeah, I put in parentheses next to it, wouldn't be allowed, because it wouldn't be allowed.
Certainly. I like the ones from the 80s, like from the sort of early to mid 80s, where they're advertising things like cigars.
Oh, absolutely.
I love all that. I think that's great.
One of the best things to do is actually go back and watch cinema adverts, the old Pearl and Dean stuff, because they used to get quite big celebrities advertising cigarettes, like Iwa Wuwa did one, and they actually got the Goons back together in the 70s to do one. Sans Harry Seacombe, but they got Milligan and Sellers to do one.
That is brilliant. I love it.
And that was for Benny Hedgehogs as well. That wasn't for some sort of massively expensive brand. This was for Benson and Hedges. Back in the days when cigarettes actually had different packaging, because as far as I'm aware now, they all have the same muddy green packaging. Yeah, because that'll stop people smoking.
Of course, it's ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, at the very least, the old ones were beautiful. There's that. A lot of the old cigarette packets are really actually quite attractive.
Oh yeah, I mean, it isn't going to stop anyone smoking, though.
No, of course not. It's ridiculous. It's a token thing. Either just it's one thing or the other, isn't it? Just ban them or shut up about them.
Yeah, just direct every single bit of tax into the NHS to treat people when they do actually get emphysema.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I smoked for 25 years, so not once did I buy any cigarette based on its packaging.
No, of course not. Of course
not once. I had based on it purely on how much change I had. And that's the major thing. I had a brand, and if I couldn't afford that brand, I would buy another brand. It's not a problem.
I have a friend who's so perverse that he actually collects the hideous images from cigarette packets.
Again, you just wouldn't. Yeah, again, you just don't look at that when you're smoking your tabs. But anyway, very strange. Speaking of cigarettes, Scottish Widows is the next advert. And to be fair, you wouldn't be able to distinguish that advert from an advert now. They're exactly the same advertising.
Yeah.
The widow in the hood, running about, and that is a classic example of if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. I mean, there are some actually really beautiful adverts from this period. I always remember the Turkish Delight one.
Oh, that one ran for years. That one, I think, was from the early 80s.
It's a really pretty advert, that. I remember it's probably one of the first that lodged in my brain as a child.
Because it was on a lot when I was a kid.
Yes.
But it was on loads.
Very evocative. It has this very evocative quality to it that I really, really like. Hate Turkish Delight, by the way. Absolutely loathe the stuff. But I like the advert.
You're a heathen, Joe.
I know.
There's another one for La Motte Lager. Have you seen that one? It's animated. And it's basically like early to late Ralph Bakshi stuff.
Oh, like sort of like the rotoscoped stuff. To do.
Very much so. And nowhere in it do you actually see the lager, but it's lodged in your brain because it's so Conan the Barbarian-ish. Yeah. And so it's just nothing to do with the lager or the product in any form. They just thought, let's make a pretty advert.
There seemed to be a thing, certainly in the 80s, didn't it, about not being very specific about the product.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It had to have like a theme. It had to have like a story. You've got the whole thing like the lady loves milk tray and all that nonsense.
Which they brought back.
Yes. Because it was classic. I mean, people responded so well to it. It is a good campaign as well.
it's so James Bond.
So James Bond.
That's, it's, who doesn't like James Bond? Me. But they,
Apart from
I'm not that keen.
Loved Skyfall, hate the rest.
Skyfall.
Yeah.
Sorry, it has to be done every time I hear that word, but never mind. The last advert in the cycle is for something that I miss dearly, and it's Oracle, which is the ITV's teletext service.
Oh, yes.
Love teletext. So if I can't sleep sometimes, and I've said this before on the podcast, sometimes if I can't sleep, I have a telly in my bedroom and I will put Google Chrome on and I will throw pages from CFAX on YouTube on the telly and just fall asleep to the teletext music. Because I used to do that when I was a student. If I couldn't sleep when I was a student, I would put BBC Two on and wait until the Snoopy was over. And then pages from CFAX would invariably come up for a couple of hours. I would fall asleep to that.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, I can just about remember teletext. I could just about remember teletext.
I don't like it. I'm lying. I love it.
There was a Knightmare teletext game, wasn't there?
Yes, there was. There was quite a few. There was Bamboozle being probably the most famous teletext game, which was on Channel 4. They had a soap as well every day.
Really?
And an ongoing text soap. Yeah. I can't remember for the life of me what it was called, but I do remember watching it. It's like kind of like The Archers, but in teletext.
That is great.
Oh, it's fantastic. And what a great use of something like that. But I suppose the internet superseded it eventually, and it's, which is funny because Pages from CFAX is now on the internet.
Yeah,
so.
Of course. I mean, there is room, I think. There is room for maybe like a television, like an interactive television channel for some format like that to come back. That'd be quite fun.
Absolutely. They should totally bring teletext back in some form.
As a kind of consciously retro thing. That'd be fun.
I couldn't agree with you enough, but everybody knows my feelings on teletext. I love it, love it, love it. But that's your answer for this week. We shall be back in a couple of minutes then, and George will wax lyrical on Knightmare for a long time, I would imagine, on this one. Excellent stuff. Bye-bye for now.
He-Man will be right back after these messages.
Stand by for a soccer special. Newcastle v Middlesbrough coming up after this break.
Oh, new kitchen.
So easy with the help of the new DIY discount warehouse. Open 6 days a week until 8 on Thursdays.
Flush finish.
Your hair looks nice, Joan.
Throughout your life, you'll be exposed to nearly 700,000 commercials.
Clean. Soft and manageable.
Darling, have you seen my extra power turbo drill with reversible hammer action?
Man.
Whatever the quality of the commercials, don't compromise on the quality of the picture.
A Sony Trinitron with flat screen and variable color balance.
Breaking technology's boundaries.
Life is full of decisions, some of the head, some of the heart. Take your next car. Will it have a catalytic converter that removes 95% of pollutants? Will it be clean yet lose nothing in performance? Will it have all this at no extra cost? In short, will it be one of the new generation of Audis? Vorsprung durch Technik, as both your head and your heart would say.
Scottish widows. Looking good for your money.
The newspaper, delivered in time-honored tradition. But imagine a newspaper that's constantly updated. 15,000 times a day. Covers topics like useful recipes, city news, the latest sports reports, and what's on at the theater. Altogether 1,600 pages of useful information. The ultimate newspaper, brought to you by Oracle.
And now back to He-Man.
And we are back. Hope you enjoyed the ads as much as we did. So, as I mentioned before we left the break, we are talking about Knightmare this week. Just a bit of context if you've never heard of it, and if you've never heard of it, what the hell are you doing listening to this podcast?
Absolutely. Get out of here now. Dismissed.
I know, it's not like we've never mentioned it. We have mentioned it a lot, but there we go. It was a television programme for children and was broadcast on CITV from the 7th September 1987 till the 11th of November 1994. And it was an adventure game show based on things like Dungeons and Dragons and Hero Quest and that kind of thing. 4 children, one who would take the role of a sightless dungeoneer, and the remaining 3 would act as their guide watching in the studio by television, basically. They would traverse a medieval environment as they attempt to complete a quest and exit the dungeon, using only their wits to overcome puzzles, obstacles, and unusual characters that they meet along the journey. So very much Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of thing. It was inspired by George. You picked this subject?
I did. And
why?
There's none better. To be perfectly honest, there's none better to be waxing lyrical about, especially if you were a child of the sort of mid to late 1980s, early 1990s, because it had a damn good run, didn't it? For a British
for about 7 years.
Yeah, for a British children's show. I mean, there were 8 seasons. To run for that length of time is significant. It just didn't happen. It did not happen.
It should have run longer.
It definitely should, because it was cancelled at the height of its popularity.
And it was by mistake.
Yeah.
Literally by mistake. What happened is that it was very Alan Partridge-y. The outgoing producer or the commissioner of children's programming signed off on it, and then the incoming one missed the memo and cancelled it.
That's appalling.
And literally, it was just literally bureaucratic pencil pushing that did for the program.
That is appalling.
And what happened was they said, "Oh well, we'll do it next season," but they, in that year, they realised how much money they saved by not
doing it, of course.
And therefore said, well, it's not worth it anymore. We're not going to do it anymore.
That is absolute insanity, given the kind of viewing figures it was pulling in. At its very height, Knightmare was one of the most watched children's shows in the UK, and was actually one of the most watched shows in the UK, because it's one of those rare artifacts that appeal to not only the target demographic, but also the parents as well, and the older siblings. That's one of the fun things about Knightmare. If you watch it now, there's a massive demographic. There's a broad range. If you take the Dungeoneers and the Advisors as a sample, there is at least as many girls as there are boys, which is very unusual for the time, I can tell you.
Oh, yeah.
And the age range, they range from being very young, like 8 years old, right up to being mid to late teens. I mean, the oldest team I can think of came in season 7, I believe. And they were a group of public school boys who were about 14, 15. So that's an enormous demographic to appeal to. And when you actually sit down and watch it, it's not difficult to see why. It's not difficult to see why. It's one of those very, very rare shows that, as we were talking about earlier, unlike most nostalgic shows, unlike many shows that have a kind of sentiment attached to them, where it is just sentiment, Knightmare is fantastic. It's an absolutely beautifully put together piece of work. In conception alone, like my guess is the only reason it was ever optioned is because whoever had the say didn't understand it at all. Can you imagine even trying to pitch it at the time? Because it's so ambitious. It's so insanely ambitious, given the technological limitations of the era. A children's show that required so much space, so much in the way of technology, so much in the way of coordination. Incredible scripts to take account for all of the various potential pathways and decisions that the Dungeoneers and the Advisors could take. Making a single episode must have been an absolute nightmare. Pun not intended, but it must have been insane.
Yeah, I think it was a combination of the guy who created it was a guy called Tim Child, and he was originally inspired by ZX Spectrum games, actually, like a Tic Tac and Dragon Talk and things like that, and all that sort of. In the early 80s, excuse me, there was a real influx of the Dungeons and Dragons, sword and sorcery. You can tell by the movies of the time, like Conan, Krull, Hawk the Slayer, that kind of thing. Loads of stuff like that about. And I think it was a combination of the fact that he'd had prior successes with a lot of things. And he'd been working with people like Robert Harris, he'd been working with people like John Pear. He'd been doing things like Hitchhikers on BBC. So you had a lot of people who were at the top of their game who knew what they were doing. And you had somewhere like Anglia Television who was producing it, who they didn't produce much television, did Anglia. They did things like Survival, and I think they produced things like The Avengers, I think they did.
Yeah.
And they just wanted to put themselves on the map.
Yeah, well, I mean, Knightmare was a perfect way to do it because it's an experiment that was unique at the time. There was nothing quite like it. So, not only on children's television, but on television in general. It was an almost entirely unique experiment. And there hasn't really been much like it since, to be perfectly honest. It's an experiment that, despite being very apt for present day technology with the effervescence of VR technology that we have now, which would be perfect for a return to Knightmare, just rejigging the format slightly. So maybe the helmet is the way that that you enter the dungeon, that you can perceive the dungeon rather than being the thing that shields you from the dungeon, that makes that maintains the illusion. That could be beautiful, but I cannot think of anything quite like it. But it's not just the technology and the concept that makes it special. What makes Knightmare special is this it's like say Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings. It's like those projects where there is something ineffable behind the scenes that makes it work. There is this very happy and unlikely confluence of elements that comes together and makes something beautiful. Part of what makes Knightmare work is not just the conception and the technology, but it's the fact that it has mythology. That works really well, and it's very well conveyed. If you watch the early episodes, you get little hints as to what's going on, as to what the dungeon actually is. Because, of course, the dungeon itself is it's rendered in quite a crude way. In many respects, the computer graphics at the time were in their infancy, so to a modern eye it looks very crude indeed. But that has gotten around to a certain degree because it's referred to as an environment that is not real anyway. It's a magical environment. It's an illusory environment that shifts and changes depending on various factors like what season it is and the dungeoneer's particular quest and what characters they meet. It lends the dungeon itself a kind of fluidity and a kind of vitality. It makes it a living entity, a living artifact. And that fascinated me as a child. I was always fascinated whenever you'd get from Treguard, the show's host, massively, just brilliantly played by Hugo Mayad, little suggestions like he would say that the dungeon is obscure, the dungeon shifts and changes, the dungeon expands beyond the bounds of the castle in certain later seasons, so that it can be exited and entered through different fortresses and through different areas of this sort of medieval fantastical world. It's a brilliant, brilliant way of providing narrative hooks for young minds. And it's certainly something that snared me. I could not get enough of that stuff. The mythology of the dungeon is fantastic. Then you have, married to that, on top of the fact that it's totally unpatronizing to its audience. That is something that I think I always notice about Knightmare. I mean, as I said, I watch it annually. I watch it at least once a year, every year, and every single time I not only enjoy it, I don't get bored of it, even though I know how every quest ends at this point. I not only don't get bored of it, I find something new to appreciate about it. I find the fact that it's so unpatronizing, that it doesn't condescend its audience at all, that it treats them with enormous sophistication. It treats them as intelligent. It treats them as imaginative. It puts them in situations that are actually quite bloody frightening.
Oh yeah.
It's a stunning piece of work. And it's no wonder that children of the era gravitated to it, because it treats them with sophistication.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where it's actively telling you probably aren't going to win this.
Yeah, absolutely.
To the point. Well, to the point that they only had 8 winners in 8 seasons.
In 8 seasons, so that's amazing, isn't it? Considering that every season had God knows how many teams coming through.
Loads.
certainly in the early seasons. One of the interesting things about Knightmare is watching it from season 1 to season 8. You get to see sort of the progression of not only the dungeon itself and the game, but also the behind the scenes stuff. You actually get to see how it becomes tighter, how the writing becomes better, how the quests become more fluid. How they introduce time saving devices and that kind of thing. The early seasons are very ragged, very ropey, because people, obviously, it's an experiment.
It's brand new.
It's totally brand new. And if you listen,
nobody had ever done it. Yeah,
exactly. Some of the interviews with Hugo Myatt are hilarious on the matter because he did not know what he was doing. He had not the first clue. So he would be standing there in the set of the antechamber with the kids, and the kids wouldn't know what they were doing, and he would be being told information through an earpiece, and he didn't know what was going on. And he would be able to see the dungeon through the medium of the view screen, the magic mirror, as they would. But very often stuff would crop up that he didn't know was going to happen.
Yeah, so he had to basically fly by the seat of his pants, which is good because he was an improv actor.
Absolutely.
And also, I mean, we have mentioned him a few times, but Hugo Myatt was basically the glue that stuck Knightmare together in the early seasons. Because if he hadn't been Treguard, can you imagine if it had been somebody who didn't care or didn't know what they were doing?
No, I'm not sure it would have gone on. To be honest,
No,
I'm not sure it would have gone on. Hugo Myatt does a lot of stuff in the early seasons of Knightmare when it is a little bit more ragged and ropey. I imagine a lot of the extended mythology may have come from his improv stuff, where he's trying to get out of a particular situation, when he's telling the Dungeoneers, "Oh, your life force is critical, team," or, "Hurry up, I hear something approaching and it's not friendly." That kind of thing. It's brilliant atmosphere. It is, and also, I'm a horror aficionado, and I have been since I was a kid. I was raised on horror, because my mother is a horror fan, and Knightmare is genuinely frightening. It's genuinely scary. You have this notion of, to speed things along, essentially, it's just to make sure that they don't hang around forever in the same room and it gets boring. They have this mechanism, the 2 mechanisms really. There's the life force meter, which is fantastic. The early life force meter, which is portrayed as a sort of digital Dungeoneer's face, that the helmet flakes away in pieces, and then the flesh flakes away from the skull, and then eventually the skull breaks up and floats away. And that is their life force meter, which they replenish by finding or earning food within the dungeon. That is designed to hurry them along, so that they don't spend too much time just dithering in one room. But there's also the external threats. There's the notion that there is something or some things that will come after them if they don't hurry up. And it's very brilliantly framed. It's very brilliantly introduced to ramp up tension, because it's often a word from Treguard first. He will say something like, "You have lingered too long in this chamber, team," or something like that. And then you'll start to hear something. You'll start to hear a heartbeat, or you'll start to hear a chord of music, or you'll start to hear like shambling or footsteps or something like that. And as I remember as a kid losing my shit.
It's the bomb as well.
The bomb
bombs
room.
I remember the bomb rooms if they linger too long. Warning, team! And what's the other one? The Catacomb Bite.
The Catacomb Bite. Yeah, that was a brilliant monster. And what I like, I mean, these rooms featured in the early seasons of Knightmare, so they're very crude looking. It's sort of one frame animation. It looks a little bit like stop motion animation. It's not that great, but there is something about, as there often is when it comes to things that are scary or disturbing, because they are crudely rendered, there is something about that makes them even scarier.
Yes, and like otherworldliness.
Yeah, absolutely. It removes them one step from reality and makes them scarier. And of course, there is a justification for it, which Treguard gives. I think he gives it in the early seasons, there is this room with a big sort of magical scorpion. It's like an illusory scorpion. You can see through it. And the Dungeoneers have to walk past it when the sting is curled up. But if you look at it, it's transparent. It's see-through. And Traegod actually says when it first appears that this creature is created by Magic Team, but it can do you harm. And it's brilliant. It's so clever. It's just a throwaway line, but it lends the creature mythology. It makes it something more than it otherwise could be, but it also justifies why it's slightly ropey.
Well, that's one of the great things about fantasy, isn't it? Because nothing's off limits in a fantasy world. You can always make a justification, or you can always give a reason why something is the way it is in a fantasy world, which you maybe can't always in a cop drama.
Yeah, at least, I mean, very often that becomes the source of mythology, as it very much did in Knightmare. I mean, they started to introduce end of season narratives at one point. I mean, all of them have them, but in the early days, it is just an excuse to end the episode and end the season. You have this notion, and it's established at the end of the first season that the quest season, there is this notion of the path. The path opens at a particular time in the year to allow Dungeoneers through, and then closes again. And when it closes, the dungeon disintegrates and reforms into a new shape. It's great. It's a brilliant, brilliant, subtle mythology just to justify the fact that it has a limited season run.
Absolutely.
It's great.
And I think that they said that with every quest as well. Every quest is different because the dungeon decides to reform and change after every quest just to mess with you.
Absolutely it does. I mean, there is an argument, and I hear a lot of people say this, that there was a point when the quests and the dungeon became a little bit more formulaic. It's sort of around the season 4, season 5 mark, and that is definitely true. Certainly for season 4, if you look at season 4, which is when they first introduced the eye shield, I believe, there is a tendency for the quests to be very, very, very similar as a sort of time-saving exercise. But early on, certainly season 1, 2, and 3, the quests are wildly different. They're wildly different. It is not just the case that they have to go in and retrieve a particular artifact. In fact, they haven't even established at that point what would become standard later on. Later on, the Dungeoneers always had an item to retrieve. They had the Sword of Freedom, the Shield of Justice, the Cup that Heals, or the Crowning Glory. That's what they had to get. In the early seasons, that wasn't the case. They had quests like they had to free the Maiden. They had to find a character who they'd been introduced to earlier but had become trapped or had fallen through a trapdoor or something like that. They had to assemble pieces of a talisman and sort of cast a spell to put it back together or something like that. And you would always have this progression through the levels. So you would have a slightly easier time on level 1, and then it would become much more difficult and much darker on level 2, and if they were really good or very lucky, they would reach level 3, where they would invariably die.
Yeah,
but because level 3 in Knightmare is essentially it's the rage game point. It's the point at which it's almost impossible. It is almost impossible. You have to be either very good or very lucky to get level 3 on Knightmare.
Mostly very lucky.
Mostly very lucky, yeah, I have to say.
Because, to be fair, most of them are idiots.
Yeah, I mean, this is a thing in early seasons of Knightmare. I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes it was unfair as well. Sometimes it was unfair. There are certainly in the earlier seasons, when they haven't quite got the difficulty arc right yet, many of them didn't get off level 1. Many of them did not get off level 1 because there is a certain format. You know, you have your introductory room, which usually established the dungeon and sort of established the theme of the quest, where they would have to choose a particular door or pull a lever to stop a revolving set of rooms to determine where they started. And then they would have a trial, and then they would have the clue room. And the clue rooms in the early seasons of Knightmare were sons of bitches. Because you couldn't take anything. You couldn't actually take anything from the table until you'd engaged with usually a war monster.
Usually Granitas.
Usually Granitas, yeah.
And the best thing is, there's nothing funny about my name.
That's brilliant. Nothing about my name is amusing. It's great. And Tragon even says it at one point. He says, "Oh, don't laugh at his name, team. He's not known for his sense of humour." Brilliant. But the thing is, if they didn't get all of the riddles right, they would often come a cropper. Not always.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes they were allowed through if they got one or two right, but very often you had to get all three. Because what would happen is there were gradations of reward. So if you got one, then it wouldn't kill you, and you'd be allowed to go. If you got two, it would give you a clue as to what to take. If you got three, it would often give you some magic, and you would be able to shout, "I command you," and it would give you an extra reward. Unfortunately, very often the extra reward was essential for moving on, or for picking the right item from the table. And if you didn't pick the right item from the table, very often in the next room you would be killed.
Yeah, you were screwed.
You were absolutely screwed. And sometimes it would allow them to go on for ages before it called them.
Yeah.
It would allow them
they'd let you go for about 2 or 3 rooms more.
Yeah. Like, very often they would get to the wellway. They'd get to the wellway to level 2, and
then
then
go dark.
Yeah, that would be it. The first episode, and in fact, this is an excellent example of the horror in Knightmare, because of course they were operating under very limited strictures. Very often, what kills the Dungeoneers, you don't see it kill them. In the first season, for whatever reason, there's a magic lamp on the clue table, and they don't take it. They miss the clue, and they emerge into the room where the well would be, and it's completely dark. They can only see the Dungeoneer, and you can hear a weird sound in the background, and I mean it's really freaky, a really strange, odd sound, and a chord of very, very frightening music. And this is again where Hugo Mayat just comes into his own, because he has some line like, "This darkness is being made by something that doesn't like visitors. Even now it's making its dislike felt." And it's so frightening.
Yeah. To the point, and the best thing I love about that is that the Dungeoneers panic.
Yep.
And they say, "No, go left, go right, hold on, do this." And it's clear that it's like, you're not getting out of this.
You are getting out.
And there's very few slasher films that you will see will be as terrifying as what they're going through. They're literally panicking.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is one of the about Knightmare, actually. You get panicking Dungeoneers and panicking advisors, and it's brilliant because it plays on that tension, and later on it really learns that is part of the appeal of Knightmare, so it plays it up. It absolutely plays it up. When Dungeoneers are running around and they're going in the wrong direction, and the advisors are screaming contradictory advice at them, they layer over it heartbeats and chords of music to make it even scarier. It's brilliant. I distinctly remember actually sitting with my mum, because my mum also loved Knightmare. Sitting with my mum and watching it, and it was in the seasons when they introduced one of the biggest killers in Knightmare, which was the floor puzzles.
Yes.
The causeways, which was essentially a room where there would be one exit on the far end of the room, and there would be a vast pit in front of the Dungeoneer, and there would be a series of hexagonal blocks in front of them, like a bridge of hexagonal blocks. And on the blocks there would be colours, there would be numbers, there would be symbols or something like that, and they would have to get the right order, the right sequence. And whilst they were doing it, parts of the causeway were falling away. And also, to add to the tension, they had to do it in enough time. They had to do it quickly, because even if they were on the right path, if they didn't do it quick enough, it would fall. And the tension in those moments was insane. Was absolutely insane. I remember sitting with my mom watching it, and my mom screaming at the television, screaming, "You're on the wrong one! Left! Go left!" And, of course, the Dungeoneer ultimately dying. That's part of, I think, what makes Knightmare so special as well. It's the fact that you could do that. You could sit and watch it with, if you had elder or younger siblings, you could sit and watch it with them. If you had parents, you could sit and watch it with them. And it wasn't just like, contrived family time, it wasn't like the parent pretending to enjoy or get into the show. They genuinely got into it because it had stuff for them. It had elements for them. You can watch it as an adult and it stands up. It stands up really well. There's great humor. There's a lot of adult humour in it. Much more swearing than I remember. Much more.
Yeah, they didn't give a shit, did they?
They got away with a hell of a lot. And I in the
monk, especially Dog's Bottom.
Yeah, Cedric the Mad Monk. Yeah,
love Cedric. He was great.
Brilliant. Yeah,
it's one of those things that I love. Is when kids get insulted and they love it
and they enjoy it.
Funny.
Yeah,
do me, that kind of thing. And he hated children.
Yeah.
He hated everybody, but he especially hated children.
Particularly children.
Seeing him was always great. And the banter between him and Treguard, and obviously I can never remember her name, but the lady who was the guardian of the snake cave, I can never remember her name.
Oh, Lilith.
Lilith, that's it.
Well, this is an interesting thing too. In the early seasons, Treguard was much more ambiguous.
Oh yeah, he was never on the side of the Dungeoneer so much.
Not so much, no. He kind of relished the danger and he relished the death and the darkness of it. He was actually quite scary at times.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't until later on when they introduced the wider mythology of the powers that be being the good guys, and then you had the opposition being the bad guys.
Lord Fear
et al. Yeah. This time, at this point, it was more of a game in many respects. It was way more of a game, and it wasn't a case of good against bad as such. Although you did have characters who were opposed to the quest, like Mogdred, and there was a female one as well. I think her name was Malice.
Malice, yeah,
something like that. It wasn't quite as clear cut back then. Also, you had Treguard interacting with the dungeon far more.
Yes.
Far more. Like, interacting directly with the characters. He was sort of present as a sort of spectral projection. And he could talk to characters like Folly and like Cedric and like Lilith. And you even had, and I love this about the early seasons of Knightmare, you had characters that could harm Treguard.
Yeah.
That could actually sort of freeze him in place, or who could petrify him, so he couldn't give advice to the Dungeoneers.
Yes, and that did happen very famously. Team 7 of Series 2, they couldn't spell cast properly because they couldn't spell. They continually miss out the letter O of the Shroud spell, and Treguard gets sick of this in the end, and it's like, we're gonna have to move this shit along. Yeah. So it's, and they're just not getting it. And it gets to the point where they even then spell it incorrectly, and the production team would think, fuck it.
Yeah.
And they just let them through because they still misspell, oh my word. And it's like, kids I know, or people who were kids back then, who I've talked to since, every one of us, it's like a touchstone. It's like, yeah, they were thick as shit.
Yeah. But you know what? They got quite far.
They did, and I don't know how.
I think it was, in fact, I do believe it may not be that quest, but I do remember at the end of one quest, Treguard saying something like, more a matter of luck than of skill, I believe, team. You know, again, non-patronizing. It's a non-patronizing show. It doesn't pull its punches at all. If you do something wrong, you're going to be punished for it. You may not be killed right away, but it's going to punish you.
Absolutely. It's not going to give you an easy ride, and if you fuck up, then you've had it, basically. Yeah. Like you say, it won't necessarily be the next room, but it might let you get quite far, and that's the real punishing aspect of it,
isn't it? That's the kicker of it. It lets you think you might be able to muddle through. And sometimes it does give them a chance. Sometimes they are able to muddle through, and they do make it. It does happen, but rarely. Rarely.
And that's what I love about it so much. Mm-hmm. Like we said, in the early season, there weren't really bad guys as such. You had Merlin and Mogdred.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about Merlin and Mogdred, they're aspects of the same person.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it? And it's acknowledged in the mythology. The first time Merlin appears, he actually says Mogdred is his alter ego. Played by the same actor, of course, John Woodnutt.
Yeah.
And he absolutely brilliant, because he plays Merlin beautifully as this sort of inept but very powerful wizard who's perpetually confused, but also powerful to the point where he's not really mortal anymore. He's basically a godlike character. And Mogdred as entirely competent and intent, and also monstrously powerful. Very threatening when he first turns up. Very threatening indeed. Mogdred doesn't quite have the sense of humour that Lord Fear does later on.
Lord Fear is much more. I do get the feeling that they did put a bit of Skeletor into Lord Fear.
Oh, totally. Yeah, he's got more of a. He's more of a sort of like the Bond villain. He's slightly more snide and slightly more human in many respects. Mogdred is another type of entity altogether.
He's malignant.
Totally malignant, and very rarely defeated.
Oh, absolutely. If you see Mogdred, you're screwed. I mean, I remember quite a few times where it was the end of the quest, and the last thing they heard was Mogdred laughing at them.
Yep.
And that is horrifying for a kids' TV show. Horrifying.
It's terrible. It's absolutely terrifying. The way he used to appear as well was really frightening. You would get this in the early seasons. You would get this very sort of monotone note playing, like and his face would appear somewhere, like massive, like leering out of a wall or in the darkness or something. And he very often, his purpose was to frighten the Dungeoneer into making a mistake.
Yeah.
He didn't often do things directly, although he would later on when they got to level 3 or whatever. It was very rare he intervened directly. His purpose, like many of the monsters in the dungeon actually, most of the creatures aren't there to directly attack them.
No.
They're
like
there
dungeon wights and things like that.
Absolutely. The Cavern Wights
are a mechanical knight.
Oh, the mindless mechanical warrior. That was absolutely terrifying, that thing. Absolutely terrifying. First introduced in season 3, I think. And what you would hear first is this sort of clockwork clicking, and then Traegard doing his usual beware.
Oh dear, warning team.
Of the mindless mechanical warrior. You know, it's absolutely terrifying. And I do recall there is one quest where that thing followed them for like 2 or 3 levels. It just kept appearing behind them. And it was really frightening. It was genuinely really frightening. You had a similar thing, I believe it was it may have been in the same season, or it may have been in the season after, where you had the knight. You had the behemoth, they called it, which was just a guy in a knight costume. It wasn't anything that frightening. But because of the way it was introduced, it was terrifying. It would roar. It wasn't like a human, it was like a monster. It would roar. And Traegard would say this creature is less than human. It cannot be stopped by usual means. And it's like, that's brilliant! That's brilliant! Oh, yeah. So all you've got here is a guy in a knight costume that's probably come from it's probably been second-handed from some period drama or something. And it's being made into this monster that is more than what it should be. It's brilliant. It's really clever.
Well, it's that whole thing of less is more, isn't it? It's, they don't need to have intricate costumes. They don't need to have intricate backstories. That's not the point of the show. No. It's about threat. It's as you were saying with the Mogdred, whenever he would appear, he wouldn't have a theme music as such. He'd have this one note. Yeah. It's something that Hans Zimmer used in The Dark Knight with the Joker. You notice the Joker doesn't have theme music, so it just has meh, and that is threatening. It's building to something, but it never builds to something, and that creates tension. And it's exactly the same thing.
It's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, to introduce that into a children's show. I think what is essentially a horror technique, a technique that's used in horror films.
But this is back in the days when that was acceptable in kids' show, because if you look at like Children of the Stones and that kind of thing, look at children's shows back in the day, they had no problem with absolutely scaring the crap out of children.
No, they did not.
And that was the whole point. It's something that sort of, as far as I'm aware, being lost. I don't watch much children's TV these days.
Show really. I mean, there are some that don't have a problem with distressing or disturbing kids. I mean, Adventure Time has its moments. There are scenes and sequences in that are absolutely distressing. Legend of Korra, actually, the sequel to the Legend of Aang, has a lot of moments that are really near the knuckle.
Sarah Jane Adventures did the same thing as well.
It did, yes. It did have...
with the trickster and things like that.
Yes, I mean, which is essentially, it's almost Cenobitic. It's almost like something from Hellraiser, that thing.
Absolutely. And with a similar sort of USP as well. basically, making deals and that kind of thing. So
kind of a similar modus operandi going on. Yeah.
Exactly. Obviously, things moved on in the dungeon as well. And we got, from Series 4, Treguard had an assistant. We got Pickle the Elf, played by David Lerner, who we didn't know. Was the OG, Marvin the Paranoid Android.
Yeah, and it was a brilliant move, really. What that did was allowed somebody to play off Treguard, and it gave Hugo Myatt a bit of a break, essentially, because he was carrying the season, and he was giving all the advice. And it doesn't really fit for him to be giving too much advice to the Dungeoneers. He's the dungeon master, you know? It's his dungeon. He presides over the game. He doesn't really control it, and it's a little bit too much for him to be endlessly advising the Dungeoneers. Pickle was the lighter side of it. Really. He was friendlier, and he was more apt to give advice, and it also allowed for some wonderful jokes. It allowed for some wonderful set pieces, because they didn't get on. You know, Pickle would endlessly annoy Treguard, who would get very crotchety with him for giving too much specific advice. Or, in the very, very early days, actively getting involved in the quest.
Yeah.
There was a period where he actually turned up in the Greenwood, I believe.
I think so.
And I
think I ever remember that.
Yeah, he actively turned up in the Greenwood and saved the Dungeoneer from a character called Fatilla the Hun.
Nice.
Which Treguard was not happy about, as you can imagine.
No, I can imagine. I can imagine.
He was definitely also there to explain just the basic mechanics of the game, because, of course, you have to bear in mind they were trying all the time to speed it up. They were trying all the time to get it so that it moved more fluidly, so that you didn't get the Dungeoneers hanging around endlessly in the same space and in the same dithering.
That's the worst thing about Knightmare.
It is, and what I like about it is it's the dithering teams that always die.
Yeah.
It's indecision. Indecision is the worst thing in Knightmare. Make a decision and run with it, move with it. You will, generally they'll be rewarded for that. If you dither, if you hang around, if you make it too complicated, then it's not going to work. You are going to fail.
Yeah.
And that's often what happened. They would dither over the items, they would endlessly discuss the merits of taking this over that, and actually the choice was often fairly obvious. It was often obvious, certainly later on, in the later seasons, the choices of what item to take were fairly clear. You had items that were useful and items that were not. Like, you would never take weapons, for example.
No, never. They always said that, and people still did it. They said never take weapons or anything shiny.
Yeah. And they still did it.
Oh, yeah.
You would still get teams who would pick up daggers or axes or stuff like that, and it's like... And of course, as Treguard himself often pointed out when they eventually died, what use a dagger to one who is blindfold?
Yeah.
Exactly. What are you going to do with it? Exactly.
Yeah.
The only weapons the Dungeoneers were supposed to carry were magic.
Yes. And talismans.
Enchanted items and potions and things like that. Occasionally, the odd captive pixie who would attack people with her needle.
Yes. I remember
Pixel. Pixel the Pixie, who had a slightly Dorset accent and would attack people with her needle. Usually goblins.
There was a lot of call for regional accents.
Yeah, Knightmare had loads, didn't it? It had loads. I mean, you had Julius Scaramanga, the merchant, who was, he was, what accent was he? He's from the north, wasn't he? He was sort of like, sort of Mancunian. He had that quality about him.
Lancastrian sort of to it. I think the dwarfs did as well.
Mm-hmm.
I remember correctly, and I could be completely wrong on this one. They had a dwarf on there, and they went the Pratchett route of it was a bloke playing the dwarf, but the dwarf was actually a girl.
Oh, I can't.
I'm sure. I think dragons tended to be from the north as well.
The dragons, yeah. Smirkanoff.
Great. There was that one they always appeared on the nose of. And so, go really quietly along. No,
Owen.
don't go really quietly. Fucking run.
Run. Yeah, Owen the dragon. Owen is really
he was Welsh.
Owen was
obviously
really interesting because in the early seasons when Owen appears, he's a bad guy. He's a threat. He's what
Wants
used
to
to
eat
happen.
you.
They would emerge from the door, and it would all be dark. You couldn't see anything, and then you'd see smoke rising from his maw, and then suddenly Mogdred would appear and wake him up, and then the darkness would disappear, and then there would be Owen. And what they'd have to do was cast a spell to send him back to sleep. But later on, I think it's sort of around season 3, season 4, whenever they encountered Owen, he became a friendly character. And what they had to do was the usual thing of answering riddles to get magic.
Yeah, he sort of replaced the war monsters a little bit.
Which they always got wrong. Owen's riddles they always got wrong. Even though Owen's were actually really easy.
Yeah, because some of them were really hard.
Some were evil.
Impossible.
If you didn't know the mythologies they were asking questions about, if you didn't know the specific stories, then you just wouldn't be able to get them. In fact, there was one episode where the wall monsters asked questions about the Hobbit.
Yes.
So if you haven't, fortunately, someone in the team had read it, so they knew what the answers were. But if they hadn't, then how on earth would you know?
You wouldn't. You'd be dead straight away.
You would be screwed. You would be totally screwed. But yeah, as Glenn was saying, it did move on, and it did sort of it started to get its own drive, and as it moved on, so too did the mythology of the dungeon. It started to develop beautifully. So it's sort of around season 4, you get Traegard talking about how the dungeon has expanded. It's actually grown outside the bounds of the castle, and now can open into other realms and worlds. So you have infiltrators from other worlds. You have Pickles people, the elves, for example. They start coming in. So you start to encounter characters like Velda, who is a female warrior elf and is very ambiguous indeed. They have to please her. They have to give her some token that they aren't a threat. Otherwise, she will knife them. And there is a sequence. She carries knives around. And there is a sequence where, the ogre? Do you remember the ogre from the early season?
Yeah.
She knifes him in the belly.
Nice.
Yeah. In a children's show, she actually knifes the ogre. And it doesn't kill him, but it sends him away, clutching his belly. And it's like, good God. Wow. Would you ever get away with anything like that? And I'm not sure you would. I'm not sure.
Probably not.
Would.
Britain. But, there you go. Britain in the 80s.
Britain in the 80s, man. But it moved on. So you started to get, outside areas, whereas all the early episodes were under the ground. They were all in the dungeon. You started to get the Greenwood areas, which was sort of like a very spooky, very unpleasantly lit forest where they would have to encounter various characters and solve really weird puzzles. Like they would have to do things like there was one room where there were tree stumps, and to find the exit, they had to follow a pattern around the tree stumps that would usually be marked out by other characters, like the new jester Motley, or someone like that. And if they got it wrong, they wouldn't get out.
Nope.
It was around that time as well that they introduced one of the most iconic things from Knightmare, which is the goblins.
Yeah, the goblins were cool.
The goblins in Knightmare are not like goblins in most other mythologies. They're really frightening. They're genuinely horrible. Very cheap costume, there's nothing sophisticated about it at all, but again, that lack of sophistication helps a great, great deal. They look weird. They look sort of hunched over and gnarled and scampering and dirty and generally unpleasant, but it's the sound that precedes them that lasted right up until the last season.
It's that if you can get the Foley right, if you can get a sound that works, then it's that's half the battle, because if people can believe the sound, they can believe anything that comes after.
Yeah.
And Knightmare was extraordinarily good at getting the sounds right, getting the tone right. We've said it before with musical cues and things like that. If you can get that done, you've got half the battle. If you can create that atmosphere, then people will forgive anything else that comes along, even if it looks ropey. And classic Doctor Who was a great example of that.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's it, really. What they're doing is filling in the gaps, or what they're doing is engaging the audience. They are getting you to engage with the subject matter to such a degree that you fill in the gaps. You buy into the fantasy and you make it your own. I distinctly remember whenever that goblin horn went, and it's very peculiar, that horn, my heart would skip a beat because you knew they were coming. You knew something unpleasant was coming for them. And it was terrifying. It was genuinely frightening. And other creatures would have different sounds or different musical cues that would be absolutely terrifying. I remember in the last season, there was a red dragon called Baal-Shabar who would follow the Dungeoneers, and whenever he was turning up, you heard not only this hideous sort of deep chord of music, you would hear his tail scraping across the floor.
Yeah.
Really terrifying. I mean, genuinely terrifying. You had also in that same season the Skeletrons.
I remember the Skeletrons.
They were like computer-generated bone men, and they would have this really weird, eerie chord of music, and you would hear the bones clanking when they turned up. Frightening as hell.
Oh yeah, well, the aforementioned Catacomb Bite had a similar sort of sound as well. You could hear that thing. And, what was the other one? Ariadne.
Ariadne.
Well,
you know what?
You got this synthesizer sting, and it's like, shit.
A lot of people who kind of vaguely recall Knightmare, but don't recall specifics, remember Ariadne. Ariadne, for those who don't know, Ariadne was the queen of the spiders in the dungeon. She first appeared in season 2, I believe.
Yes.
And she would have this very particular sound that would accompany her. Every footstep there would be this boom sound. And she was absolutely terrifying. She was often one of the big threats. She was one of the big problems to overcome, such that she was almost like the equivalent of an end-of-level boss.
Yeah,
certainly in season 4. In season 4, they relocated her to the Greenwood, and she would appear at the end of level 2 in every quest, and her room, if you like, was 2 parts. So there would be an area of the forest where there was a hollow in a tree and webs stretched between the trees, and she would crawl from one side of the screen to the other, and they had to very quickly get out without touching the webs. And then there was a follow-up room where you would get a top-down view of the clearing in the woods, and there'd be a web stretched between the trees, and she would come over them and follow the Dungeoneer to the exit. And if they didn't have the right spells or the right equipment, she would eat them.
Yep.
She would devour them. And there was a horrible, nasty, crunchy, squelchy sound when she ate them.
Which has to happen.
Yep.
And you're eaten by a spider. She was fantastic. And she'd web up the doorways as well if you weren't quick enough getting out.
So you couldn't escape. Yeah.
Nope. And it was, fantastic. It was just absolutely fantastic the way that they used to kill with abandoned children. And obviously
children.
Absolutely. And you had, obviously Lord Fear would come into it. And,
Lord Fear. I mean, I think Lord Fear is probably one of the fan favourite characters, to be honest. He's certainly one of my favourite characters.
Oh, I love Lord Fear.
Lord Fear, played by Mark Knight, I believe.
He got into it as much as Hugo Myatt got into it. Oh my God,
he was the dark equivalent of Hugo Myatt. And their badinage, when they used to engage with one another, it was fantastic. They introduced this wonderful notion in I think it was around season 5, that the spy glasses. The spy glasses were artifacts that looked like big magnifying glasses that they'd find or earn scattered around the dungeon, and they had to hold them up in front of the eye shield, which was kind of a magic shield that showed them the path. And what they would get is an opportunity to spy on the bad guy of those seasons, which was Lord Fear. And Lord Fear would be sat in his palace of Mount Fear, gazing either into a crystal ball or into a magic pool or something like that. And he would be talking to his motley crew of villains, which were all brilliant, all absolutely brilliant characters. You had the Goblin Master Scarkill, you had Sylvester Hans, who was probably my favourite character. Dirty, runty little thief character. You had lots of different characters, and through those interactions, the Dungeoneers would learn vital clues. But it was a dangerous thing to do. And it was, again, some brilliant horror. He would detect them. He would start to feel them looking at him, and suddenly he'd look up from his pool and start snarling at them, and suddenly this red light would appear in his eyes, and they had to drop the spyglass very quickly. It was terrifying.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I loved is when you were spying, in any sort of media, when you're spying on somebody through a magical thing and they suddenly realise, I could see you. And it's like, oh shit!
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm coming to get you, that kind of thing. Fantastic.
I mean, I do recall a lot of the advisors shrieking. Point, throw it down, put it down, just throw it away, you know.
Panic. I love the panic is the best thing about Knightmare. When they invite, get over there! It's like with the bomb, when the Dungeoneer would be just crapping about and just saying, I'll go this way, go that way. And they say, get out the room! Get out the room!
What I like is when the advisors forget. When they forget, they're so panicked that they forget that their Dungeoneer can't see. They forget that they can't see where to run to, and the Dungeoneer is sort of dithering about, and they're sort of like, where do I go? What do I do? And the advisors are just shrieking at them. Contradictory advice.
Christopher Lloyd in Star Trek 3. Get out of there! When they're blowing up the Enterprise.
Absolutely.
It's that. It literally is that. Or when they give crap advice, i.e. that kid who just sidestepped to the right on a path and just fell off the path.
It is absolutely classic, that death. It is absolutely classic. If you look up like lists of best Knightmare deaths, that one is usually right at the top. There's there's a room in season 6 called the Block and Tackle. Which is a room where the walls and the floor would move. They would sort of slide all over the place and the floor would fall away. And you've got this Dungeoneer who is stood in the middle of the room and the floor falls away to his left, and immediately, like instinctively, as though he wants to kill him, the advisor goes sidestep to the left. That's the end. He sidesteps to the left and he falls and he dies. It's one of the best deaths.
Literally, Treguard is sort of stood there up and melts for a second.
There is a moment where Hugo, you can see it. You can see in Hugo Meyer's eyes. Yeah, you can sort of see what
happened.
What happened?
It's fantastic.
That said, when they do well, when they do something that's really difficult, you can sometimes hear the production crew in the background cheering.
Oh yeah.
There's a particular very difficult puzzle at the end in level 3 in season 4, where the Dungeoneer emerges and they're at the top right-hand corner of the screen. They come through a doorway and they're standing on a transporter pad, and there are sequences of platforms going down to the floor, and there's a doorway and exit on the right. And what they have to do is step in the direction that they want to go, then step back to the middle, and it will transport them to the appropriate platform. However, on one of the platforms, there's a knight swinging his sword. And to get it right is really difficult. It's a really difficult quest. And the first team that do it right, when they emerge down by the door, you can actually hear the production crew cheer and clap their hands. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I must say, there are certain puzzles, certainly towards the latter days, when they get more of a sense of progression in the quest, so that you get more of a narrative sense. Like they do their best to make level 3 like a climactic moment. So you get these puzzles that are next to impossible. You get these encounters where if you don't have the special magic, then you're dead. One of the best ones is in season 6, and it's the Great Causeway. The Great Causeway it's not, you remember those causeway puzzles we were talking about earlier with the blocks that fall away? It's not just one of them. It's about 4, one after the other, interlinked. And not only that, very often they are floor puzzles that they don't get the clues to earlier on. They have to figure them out where they are from the starting point. And when teams win that, and I think only one of them gets through. Only one of them gets through that. The production team go mental.
You can hear him going, yeah!
I don't think they expected them to do it.
No.
I don't think they expected them to win through. And
That's good that they did.
And they do.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. No, that is good that they did. Yeah, no, it was a great. I mean, just on the subject of death, very quickly. I don't want to dwell on her because I don't like her. But Mary Whitehouse is one of she popped up
yes.
and complained.
Yes. Well, actually, the story goes that she had never even seen Knightmare.
She never saw 90% of the things she complained about.
No, she never saw it. What happened was she had one of her, scrutty little advisors who told her, oh, there's this show on CITV, on children's ITV, where they're killing kids. Yeah. And of course, she and her lot went up in arms and got their campaign against it. However, what the production crew of Knightmare did, and they didn't have to do this, they could have just told her to, quite frankly, go do one, but they didn't. They actually responded with all grace. They invited her onto the set. They invited her to go and see it, and then she saw, well, actually, this is a show where children kind of die, but also it's educational, it's challenging, it's clever, it's witty, and
it's made very clear that it's all fantasy.
Absolutely. They actually introduced that. I mean, Traegod actually says whenever a team dies that they survived in your world or something like that, or all is illusion in the dungeon below, that kind of thing. And she actually recanted. She actually withdrew her complaints about it. Which is, fair enough. Or what they could have done is gone the round the bend route. Because she also complained about that. Do you remember Round the Bend?
I remember Round the Bend.
Yeah, she also complained about that, and probably with good reason. Round the Bend is absolutely stunning. Round the Bend is basically everything that you don't want your child to be laughing at on the schoolyard. It's genuine schoolyard toilet humor, and it's brilliant. What they did when she complained about that is made like a sort of spitting image puppet of her that crops up every so often, and then would get smacked by Doc Croc's hammer.
Yep. Absolutely.
Which is...
Round the Bend was fantastic. It was like Your Mother Wouldn't Like It. Another great TV show. Absolutely. The way they dealt with it was great. Yeah. I mean, she was still a hateful old woman who just didn't like anything. But that's kind of the way you deal with it. Because if you just shout at her, that's kind of what she wanted.
Absolutely. It gives her ammunition. It sets up the conflict that people like her thrive on. They did it with all grace, and they made her withdraw, I mean, really, if you saw what Knightmare was like, then you'd have no choice, because it's such a good show.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's just such a high-quality piece of work.
Absolutely. They did try and make other versions as well, or they did make other versions. In France, it was Le Chevalier du Labyrinth.
That's right.
Which was great, ran from 19 September 1990 to 31st of August 1990, so effectively one season. Yep. They made one in Spain, Oh, here we go. El Rescate del Talisman. That was 29th of May 1991 to 1994, so it ran for 3 seasons.
Quite well then, not bad, really.
Both versions sponsored by Sega. Sega.
Really? I did not know that.
They did do one for Germany. They made a pilot, didn't take off, and in the States, unsurprisingly, it didn't take off. They did record the version of US version there with a pilot. It's a full-length episode featuring the original UK cast and American actors playing the contestants. It was filmed in Ipswich, of all places, in 1993, but a full series for these were not commissioned for the US version. They say it was due to production companies not liking the idea for a complex chroma key-based show. I would posit that's probably an excuse.
Yep.
It's more a case of this shit won't fly in Arkansas.
I think that's most likely. I mean, given that it talked a lot about mythology and it had magic, it had kids casting spells and stuff like that. I think it probably would have caused, especially at that time. I mean, that was at the height of the Dungeons and Dragons paranoia, wasn't it?
Well, Mazes and Monsters is a far out game.
Oh, I've just about forgiven Tom Hanks for that.
He was young. He needed money, literally.
Clearly, because that is like the most whorish thing anybody could have done.
Anybody who's in God's Not Dead and God's Not Dead 2 who doesn't believe in that sort of thing, that's probably harsh. And also anyone who was in The Christmas Candle.
Yeah.
Which was, what's his fucking name? Santorum.
Yeah.
That was his.
Rick
he
Santorum,
stumped up the money for that. And Susan Boyle's in that. Sylvester McCoy's in that.
Fucking hell, really?
Yeah.
The respect.
It's actors, mate, actors. They need the money. And also, was it Christmas with a capital C is always good as well. But, it's a bad, people. Didn't you know this? But yeah, I'm guessing, chroma key production difficulty aside, I'm guessing they kind of knew that in the north that it'd probably be okay. In the south, this shit probably wouldn't fly.
Probably not. No, it would have gotten complaints. There's no doubt about it. It would have gotten complaints.
I like the fact that it got literally 0 complaints in the UK.
Yeah, that's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, well,
killing kids.
People loved it. People loved it. One of the things that I do remember more than anything, and it's the reason I watch it around this year, is because it's about this time that it aired, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember rushing home on a Friday afternoon to watch it. Friday afternoon was the best time for CITV. It just so was, and it was magical. It was absolutely magical.
It used to be on a Monday when it first started. I remember that because it used to have real Ghostbusters and then Knightmare.
Oh, that's a great combination.
Oh, it gets better because afterwards, this is the period when Blockbusters was on directly after CITV. So it's like, yeah, we need that shit again. We need that stuff again is what we need. Instead of an hour-long news programme at 6, we need quarter an hour, 5:45 to 6. That'll do. Otherwise, let's get bloody Blockbusters back on. And not new ones. Not new ones. Old ones.
Not the old ones with Bob Holness.
With Bob Holness. We'll just repeat those. They've got them all. I said for ages now, you know, the programme Gogglebox? Yep. They need to do a retro version of that, where families sit down and watch old television.
Oh god, and like evoke the old associations. Yeah, that would fly. I mean, nostalgia's huge at the moment. I mean, it's particularly...
We're not sugarcoating either. I demand that they make them watch Ranger Language and Bottle Boys.
Yeah, yeah.
She's got her tits out. What? Yeah, blue tits. Oh no.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they've got to watch Round the Bend.
Oh, Round the Bend. And Round the Twist.
Around the Twist as well, God almighty, yeah.
The full round, so it's like a 360.
Yeah, all of them. Just make them watch them.
Anything with round in the title.
Yeah. I mean, you can actually watch all of Round the Bend, because Tony Husband, the guy who made it, has put them all up on his website.
Oh, there we go.
Every single one, and they are brilliant. They're so funny.
Well, I do keep trying to get, occasionally someone will put an episode of Your Mother Wouldn't Like It up. Mostly it's Palace Hill, which was fantastic, don't get me wrong, but, I do love some of the dirtier, filthier, nastier things that they used to put up, and they got away with quite a bit.
Yep.
Back in the 80s, because it wasn't as regulated as maybe it would be now.
Absolutely. That is definitely the case. They got away with so much. Well, in Nightmare got away with a lot, you know. In season 8, there is a scene, and I think they did it deliberately because they knew they were being cancelled. There's, that red dragon I told you about, Baal-Shabar?
Yeah.
There is this weird revelation, and it's such an odd story arc that he is actually suffering from dissociative personality disorder. And he is not Baal-Shabar, he is Baal and Sheba in one skin. And they don't like one another. They don't get on. And there's a scene where they're talking to Lord Fear through his view screen, and I believe it's Baal calls Sheba a smartass.
Nice.
Yeah, brilliant, so.
Nice. Again, it's because it doesn't... I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because obviously you shouldn't be going around swearing it before the watershed so much, but I think it's one of those things that arse isn't really a swear word anymore.
So not. And of course, I think at the time people were just aware that any school kid watching Nightmare has heard a million times worse on the schoolyard that afternoon.
Absolutely. Well, they got away with Granitas like season 1, season 2.
So did. So it's like, and of course they knew. They paid total reference to it. And also,
that's the thing that gets me, and that's the thing I find amazing. It's like, sort of, don't laugh at his name. We know he's got ass in his name.
Absolutely, we got it. we know. There's also like references to the female characters sometimes. Like there's a point at which Lord Fear, I believe, is describing one of the female sort of Amazonian warrior characters, and he's very clearly enamored of her. Very clearly enamored. He's describing her, the fact that she has long legs and other striking features. It's brilliant.
Nice.
It's absolute brilliance.
Just as a complete aside before we wrap things up here, I was watching, I'm a bit of a lover of The Voice, because it's trash, and I love it. Totally. I like watching the foreign versions. I watch the French version a lot. I watched the German version. I was watching the German version from 2014.
Yeah.
it was one of the things where they do the battles where the two of them singing together, and they're doing Thrift Shop because they're both the rappers, you know, the rappers.
Yeah.
You've seen them. And they're doing the song verbatim. So they're doing all the fucks and the shits and it's on German TV. And I thought, like many English speakers on the comments, it's probably because they don't really know what they mean. Until the Germans popped up and said, we know what it means, just don't care.
Just don't care. Yeah, absolutely.
Doesn't matter. It's just a word.
Yeah.
And I think that's the sort of logic that they took in Knightmare, is the fact that we don't care. It's just a word, and kids are using these words, and there's more important shit going down in Knightmare than that.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating total disregard for that and just swearing like motherfuckers on TV on EastEnders, but sometimes it just doesn't matter.
Sometimes, within context, it just does not matter. And sometimes it's funny, and kids find it funny, and they laugh at it. And it is.
And again, Knightmare like to treat kids like adults, while grown-ups, you know, it's like people who could handle this stuff, which is fantastic. That was Knightmare. Let's face it. We could go on for hours.
Absolutely. This could go on potentially forever. We could go like season by season. We could talk about, just everything. The story arcs, the characters, you know, my favorite character, Hordris, love him. All of that stuff. It could go on forever.
The season thing might be something that we do. That might be a good thing to do, because then you could obviously look at the progression. So we might definitely get you back to talk about that.
I would be well up for it. Well up.
We're gonna get you back on anyway. Now that the 7-year seal has been broken.
It's been
that's
broken.
it.
Now, yes, well, that's it now. It's like summoning a demon. You know,
exactly.
You're gonna have trouble getting rid of me now. I don't think any sort of pathetic little exorcist is gonna cut it. He's just not. I'm afraid.
Oh, we've been warned.
Many have tried.
Now. George is going to be like the message in the Black Sabbath records. He's going to linger. He's going to be there always. We're never going to truly get rid of him. Excellent. Well, I'm okay with that. I'm fine with it. George, it's been a pleasure having you on. It really has.
It's been a blast. I mean, I've been wanting to do something like this for a long time. I've hovered around doing like YouTube videos or something about Knightmare, because it's something I want people to experience. It is something, and if you happen to be a child of that time and you only vaguely remember, you know, this is another thing about Knightmare. People often don't remember what it's called. They remember images and they remember sounds. They say, Knightmare, what was that? But if you say to them, sidestep to the left, or if you say to them, where am I? Or if you say to them, ooh, nasty, or something like that, they go, oh yeah, I remember that. I loved that when I was a kid. Go watch it again. It's all up on YouTube. There's no other way to watch it, unfortunately. Go watch it. It is absolutely stunning. I guarantee you'll have a blast.
Oh yeah, definitely. Absolutely. It's a great show. Just be prepared that the first season is a bit slow. There's reasons for that. It's starting out. They're experimenting. Once sort of halfway through the first season, something clicks and everybody gets it.
That's it.
And that's it. But once the kids start, oh yeah. And it is just a case of they had kids going through this like sheep did, and they would see kids coming through and they would see what's going on and they'd think, oh yeah, if we act like it's real, it'll be better.
Yes, yeah.
And it's literally just that. You get the odd set of thickos, and you will get that on any game show.
Yep.
They're the ones that just don't get it, don't understand, and they are annoying. But once they start to get it, it's glorious. It's absolutely glorious.
Totally.
Brilliant. Anything you want to promote, George, while you're on the show? Any sort of websites or Twitters or Facebooks or anything?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you can find me and my work on www.strangeplaygrounds.com. You'll find articles, reviews, essays, also links to my my fiction, plug, on there. You can find me occasionally on the YouTube channel Exaggerated Elegy, where you'll find rants and reviews and all sorts of stuff. You can also occasionally find me on the Twitter Enigmatic Elegy, where there is usually bits of fiction and articles floating around, general comments. Please go and enjoy.
Yes, definitely. Excellent stuff all over. I can't sort of big George up enough. He's seriously one of the most talented of my friends.
Oh, thanks so much, man.
Oh, absolutely. Certainly one of the most eloquent. Your IQ does start to raise the more time you spend with George. It's brilliant. And the best thing about this is that loads of auto assemblies and loads of TF nations I've tried to sit down and talk with George about stuff. And it's just not possible because you're talking to loads of people. He's very much in demand and that kind of. It's just true. It's true. So to sit down with George and finally have a good conversation about something, it's been really good. And this is he's definitely coming back because
it's been a pleasure, man.
It's brilliant to have him on. If you want to find me on the old Facebooks, Glenn Jakeman is your best route to do that. Please send me a message, just to let me know who you are, because otherwise I will have to assume that you're some sort of horrific porn bot and block you and stuff, and I don't like doing that. If you want to find me on Twitter, it's at Cymru Nerd Cave. I'm always on there. Posting links up, usually on Back to the 80s. We will be on, at BTTE Pod on the Twitter and Facebook.com/BTTE Pod. Every night I will put up 3 things. I will put up a TV show from the 80s, usually British, sometimes American. But as I'm British, I have more sort of experience with the British TV shows. So I do like to put up an episode of Juliet Bravo up and just confuse everybody. It's a cop show, but nothing happened. I know. It's amazing. It's brilliant. That was as exciting as it got. I was very happy to put up the first episode of Casualty a little while back as well. When Casualty was good. There you go. Usually a song as well. Usually pretty mainstream. I am trying to put up sort of stuff people might not know. But on the other hand, I do like people to have a bit of a sing-along. And usually a thing. So generally, something from the 80s, just toy, montages of Rocky montages I've been looking at this week, maybe to put up. That kind of thing. Ad breaks. Just general stuff. So usually 3 things a night I will put up on that one. You can also find us on Back to the 80s podcast.blogspot.co.uk and also backtotheeighties.freeforums.net. Excellent stuff. Well, again, George, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. And like I say, we will have you on again very, very soon.
I look forward to it. I really do. It was great fun.
Oh, great stuff. I'm glad you had a good time. The outro this week is from the Amiga game of Knightmare, which I didn't know existed.
Oh, man! Yes!
I did try and find a full-length version of the theme tune. Sadly, the full-length version of the theme tune seems to be like 51 seconds. Yes. Well, that's not enough. The Amiga version has a full Amiga chiptune version of the thing, which is very good. The Spectrum version, by the way, was shit.
Yeah, you know what? The Amiga version isn't that good either, but it is more of a comprehensive game.
Yes, well, the Spectrum game I got in like 2 or 3 rooms in, and then as a kid just said, screw this. I've got things to do. And that's as a kid. But there you go. So it's a full-length version of that, and we've got a BBC One close down from 1989 where they're trailing The Godfather as if it's like a new film they're showing. It's amazing. It's amazing. Excellent stuff. George, please do say bye-bye to all our listeners.
Oh, with absolute pleasure. Thank you for listening to me waffle on for God knows how long about one of the artifacts of my childhood.
Excellent stuff. And again, thank you to everyone who listens. We do appreciate it every week. We shall be back very soon with another episode and another guest. Bye-bye for now.
Ta-ta.
child's escape to America. A man's fight for survival. A father's love for his family.
When you finish school, I want you to come and talk to me because I have plans for you. You understand?
You gave your word that you wouldn't break the peace. I didn't give mine.
The Godfather, the complete story, starting on Friday at 9 on 2.
And this is tomorrow here on 1. At 7 o'clock, Mark Goodyear and Simon Parkin present Top of the Pops. That's followed by EastEnders at 7:30. Then at 8 o'clock, People reports on the South Wales mining village that's been working flat out to save its pit, and updates the story of an army captain who lost both his sight and a hand when he was blown up by an IRA bomb in 1973. There's comedy in First of the Summer Wine at 8:30, taking us to the 9 o'clock news. And at 9:30, Anthony Hopkins portrays Donald Campbell in his last 60 days, those days which led up to his final, fatal world water speed record attempt across the lake. At 11 o'clock, Cagney and Lacey face a moral dilemma when their witness accounts differ and a policeman's career depends on what they say. That's tomorrow. And the weather, most parts of the country will have a dry, mainly clear night. However, Northern Ireland and the north and west of Scotland will be rather cloudy with some coastal showers. The far northwest will continue to have showers tomorrow morning, then thickening cloud will bring rain to Northern Ireland during the afternoon and to western fringes of Scotland during the evening. Eastern Scotland, Wales and England will be dry and fairly sunny. Top temperatures will be similar to today's, highest in the south, with rather cooler conditions in the northwest. Now, if you live within a reasonable distance from London and you're thinking of going to tomorrow's proms, a word here about tickets. There are 2 concerts tomorrow. This is the programme for the first at the Albert Hall at 7 o'clock, and I'm told that seats are still available. And this is the second concert at 10 o'clock at Kensington Town Hall. All the seats for this one are spoken for, but there will be promenade tickets available at the door. Having said all that, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, but nonetheless I will, that both concerts will be broadcast live on Radio 3. Well, now the time's coming up to 7 minutes to midnight, and we have to leave you, but on Radio 2 at the moment, there's Brian Matthew with the Arts magazine round midnight, and starting at midnight for 2 hours, Radio 1 will be in the capable hands of the ranking Miss P. We hope you can join us again tomorrow, and with that, I'll wish you a very good night on behalf of everybody here on BBC One. Good night.